Hello everyone. In my previous lecture, I introduced and little bit talked about Danish invasion, the people of Denmark. In other words, we also call them Viking. So Viking first settled in the northern part of France and later they invaded over England. Remember, I talked about the Duke of Normandy, William the Conqueror. He attacked over England and claimed the throne of England. He defeated the last Anglo-Saxon king. His name was Harold at Hastings. So the year was 1066. It was a Christmas day, right? In 1066, when he invaded England and defeated the last Anglo-Saxon king. Thus, he became the ruler of England. So, this was the beginning of French influence or Danish invasion over England. So, this was also the beginning of Middle Ages, which begin in 1066 when William the Conqueror becomes the king of England, and it continued till 1485. So we will cover almost 400 years in this lecture. Okay, all the happenings, all the events, literary history, battles, development, church influence, monarchy, parliament, Magna Carta. So lot of happenings are there. 100 Years War and the War of Roses, etc. So lot of happenings. So keep watching and enjoy today's lecture. It will be very interesting. You will know all about this Middle Ages in this lecture. Let's begin and discuss in detail. So the Normans, we are talking about the people of the France, northern France, Normandy. The Normans originally Viking, because I told that the Vikings, right, who came from the northern part, okay, from the Denmark, they settled in France, and from France they also settled in England. So the Normans originally Viking, Normans were originally Viking. Viking raiders settled in France and adopted French customs, right? So these people, Viking, who came from Denmark, from the northern part, right? We also call them Norsemen. They settled in France and adopted French cultures and traditions. Now, William the Conqueror, who was the Duke of Normandy, took over England. He introduced these customs starting the medieval period. So William Conqueror, he also introduced these customs. Which customs? French customs and tradition in England. And it was the beginning of Middle Ages. So one of his biggest changes was feudalism. So it was Norseman, okay? Or it was William the Duke who introduced feudalism in England, because feudalism was already practicing in France, right? So he also brought this feudalism to England, a system where the king owned all the land. So in feudalism, all the land belongs to the king, and then the king, he keeps some of the land with himself, and the rest of the land he distributes among the loyal nobles. And in return, these loyal nobles, in return, they provide money and military to the king, right? So then these loyal nobles distribute some of the land. These noble keep themselves, and the rest of the land these nobles distribute among lesser noble. And then some of the land, then the lesser noble, they keep themselves, while the rest of they distribute among the knights. Similarly, the knights, some of the land they keep themselves, the knights, and then the rest of they distribute among the barons, and then go on. So this was like the feudal system. So at the bottom we can see serf. Okay, we can also call them that like farmers, and they were at the bottom all the day. They worked hard, serf, and they had limited and almost no right. So Anglo-Saxon, they became the serf, okay, when the French invaded England. So we can see that William the King, he introduced feudalism, a system where the king owned all the land and distributed it to the loyal nobles in exchange for money or military support. These loyal nobles will provide military support and wealth to the king, right? So this was like a hierarchy from the king to the lesser noble and the knights, right? Now, at the bottom of society were the Anglo-Saxon. Once, right, they were the rulers. Now they were at the bottom of the society, and they became serfs. Like they would just grow lands to these nobles, to the lesser noble, to the knights, to the nobles, and to the king. So they were at the bottom. These serfs, in simple words, we call them farmers, who had to work the land but couldn't own. So these serfs, they did not own the land. They just work in these lands. They will just produce agriculture, right? The crops for the king, for the nobles, and for the churchman, for the pope, for the priest, for these all. So they were at the bottom. To maintain control, Norman barons, okay, we could call them lesser noble, built strong castles across England. So in order to control these serf, okay, or these ordinary people, these Norman barons, they did what? They built strong castles and they would live there, right? So you see, these baron, these lesser noble, the knights, the courtman, the churchman, the pope, the priest, the archbishop, the monk, the prioress. So these all people were enjoying their life, which were very limited. Okay, they were in number. While the rest of the people, the serf, they had to work day and night in the lands, right, to feed them, to provide them money, and to provide them crops and food. So this was the whole system, feudalism, which was brought by William the Conqueror, or the French, the Norseman, to England. Now, after William's death, power struggle broke out when his son Henry I died in 1135. So the son of William the Conqueror was Henry I. When Henry I died in 1135, there was a power struggle, right? So a violent conflict erupted between his daughters Metedilla and nephew Stephen. So Metedilla was the daughter of Henry I, and his nephew was Stephen. So there was like a war between these two people. Meletida, who was the daughter of Henry I, and nephew Stephen, right? After the death of Henry I, who was the son of William the Conqueror. So the chaos ended in 1154 when Metedilla's son Henry II became the king. So this conflict ended when Metedilla's sons, right, or the grandson of Henry I, Henry II became the king. He was a strong ruler who transformed or who reformed the legal system, introduced royal courts, and helped shape English common laws. So he was the man, Henry II, who introduced legal system, who introduced royal courts, and he helped shape English common laws. His wife name was Eleanor of Aquitaine. Eleanor of Aquitaine brought the French ideas of chivalry. So the idea of chivalry, bravery, was brought by Henry the second wife, and the name was Eleanor. Right, this idea she brought from France to England, which encouraged knights to protect women and go on religious quests like the crusade. So because they would tell these knights that you one of the features of you people is chivalry. You have to protect the women and you have to fight for your land. So this would encourage, this chivalry act would encourage the knights in Middle Ages. So this idea was also brought from France to England by Henry the second wife Eleanor. Now some more development. Henry's son, Henry the second son name was Richard the Lionheart. You might heard his name, who fight against Salahuddin Ayyubi, right? A Muslim ruler. So Richard the Lionheart spent most of his reign fighting in crusade, right? And most of his reign where he was ruling, so he fought in crusade and defending English lands in France. But because the England also owned some land in France, so he was defending English land in France. Who? Richard, who was the son of Henry II. He had got the title of Lion the Heart. Right? In France, he was the king of England. He was the son of the Henry II. So his brother John plotted against him when he was in France. So when Richard died, John became king. After the death of Richard the Lionheart, his brother John became the king. But faced many problems, John. Meanwhile, Henry II had also clashed with the church. While this time, okay, Henry II, we can say that the father, we can see here, the father of John, meanwhile, Henry II had also clashed with the church, with the Roman Catholic Church. How? What kind of clash was there? Actually, that Henry II, right, he appointed his friend Thomas Becket. So Thomas Becket was a religious name, right? And he appointed Thomas Becket as Archbishop of Canterbury, right, which was a large town city in England. But when Becket sided with the church over the king, Henry angry words led to the knights murdering Becket. It is said that Becket was the friend, okay, of Henry II. But he nominated him as Archbishop of Canterbury. But when there was a struggle or clash between the monarchy and the church, so this Thomas A. Becket, he sided, okay, or he favored the church. This made Henry II angry, and he sent four of his best knights to kill him. While he was in his monastery, we're talking about Thomas A. Becket, these four knights went and murdered him. Who? Thomas A. Becket. Now, Henry later made peace with the church, and Becket was declared a saint. Now, with his shrines in Canterbury became a major pilgrimage site. So it was Henry that after his death he declared him a saint, okay, and this Canterbury became one of the famous site for pilgrims. And we can see in Canterbury Tales, okay, a lot of pilgrims, they were going to Canterbury to perform their pilgrim, right? Now, development of the English language. The Norman conquest brought big changes to the English language. By 1066, the Norseman spoke a type of Old French, which became the language of the royal court, government, and nobility. So these people, Old French was spoken by the royal court, the government, and the nobility. And still, lot of common people, they spoke English, right? That was known as Old English. And the Latin was the language of the church that time. It was also used by the scholars, what? French, by the cooks and the skilled worker who served the Norman rulers. Meanwhile, English was mostly spoken by the common people, as I told you. Over time, English absorbed thousands of French words and grammar rules. This mix of language led to the development of Middle English, which was much closer to modern English than Old English had been. So now the Old English disappeared. Now we have Middle English. What is Middle English? That was the amalgamation of Old English and French words. So when thousands of French words were absorbed in Old English language, it shaped a new look of the Middle English, which looked like a modern English rather than Old English. Literary history. Now, since most common people couldn't read and write, so they continued to share stories through spoken words. Common people, they couldn't read and write, so they share stories through words. Verbal tradition were there. One popular form was the folk ballad, short narrative poems set to music. Now, another development that during the late Middle Ages, not early, late Middle Ages, religious plays became popular. So there were mystery and miracle plays and acted out stories from the Bible. So these mystery and miracle plays consist of stories were taken from the Bible, okay, and then they would be performed on the stage. And the lives of the saints. So there was story from the Bible, right, and the story of the lives of the saint, and these story became miracle and mystery stories, while morality plays taught moral lesson. So these kind of stories were performed on the stage, right? Who? By these religious people, by the priests, by the monk, by the friars, by the prioress, these people. So mystery and miracle plays acted out stories from the Bible. These stories were taken from the Bible and the lives of the saint, okay, people, while morality plays taught moral lesson to the people. So these simple performances meant to teach religious ideas to largely illiterate audience. This is very interesting. Morality and these stories, okay, they were taught through performance. And these stages were not somewhere like outside of the church, but these stories would be performed inside the churches, not outside the churches, right? Inside the churches by religious people to illiterate audience. Though these illiterate audience would come to the church, and in the church these stories would be told to them or would be performed in a simple manner, not like something like a large stage in Shakespearean age, which became later on. We're talking about Middle Ages. There was not proper stage, but these stories would be taught, okay, would be told, or would be performed with act inside the church by these religious people to illiterate audience, eventually grow into the rich tradition of English drama later on. Now, another very interesting man, King John's. King John's costly wars left England nearly bankrupt. We're talking about King John, who was the son of Henry II. So after the death of Henry II, because Richard Lyon already died, so he became the King of England. So he made England bankrupt. In 1215, he was forced to sign the Magna Carta, a document that limited the king's power and gave more authority to the barons, lesser nobles, an important early step towards democracy. So it was this Magna Carta, it was a document, a charter between the king and the baron. It was like a stepway, a doorway, or a step towards democracy. the beginning of 13th century. Remember. Now, during the reign of his son Henry III, so Henry III was the son of King John's. Baron formed a council. Okay, these baron they form a council later called Parliament, which met regularly. You see, first that was Magna Carta. There was like a council, and then in Henry II, this council got the name of Parliament, which met regularly to discuss the affairs of the state or the government. Under Edward I, the model parliament of 1295, end of 13th century, was created. So there was a model parliament in the time of Edward I was created, and allowing common people who later formed the House of Commons. Still we have House of Commons in England, right? So House of Commons had origin where? In the model parliament in 1295, which allowed common people to participate and to meet this council, and this later formed the House of Commons, and to join the baron, which were lesser noble, which became the House of Lords in government. Still we have House of Lords in England. So House of Lords, that is like upper house, right, and consists of the lords, and then we have lower house that is called common, House of Commons, and it consists of the common people who contest election, and they come and they form government, right? So the House of Lords and the House of Commons had origin in model parliament in 1295. Now the decline of feudalism. As trade increased, medieval town grew, right? Because of the trade, medieval town grew, and boosting the power of common people. Common people got some power, and the crusade played a role in this economic expense because people need money. They had to produce a lot of product. So in these towns, merchants and craftspeople form guild, or we can say that guilds, and this is called organization that control prices and regulated trades and set rules for the training apprentices to become master craftsmen. So you see a lot of happenings are happening in this Middle Ages. As town grew and became trade center, feudalism declined because wealth was no longer based only on land. Now, if you did not have land, it doesn't mean that you were poor. You could do anything else to become rich. So people were not depending on the land only. So feudalism declined because wealth was no longer based only on land. However, crowded towns with poor sanitation led to the rapid spread of diseases like the plague. We can see a lot of plagues were there because there was poor sanitation system in England and in Europe. So meanwhile, universities became important center of learning. Before that, the center was the church. The church was the center of the art, of the literature, of the learning. Now university became the center of learning. At Oxford, scholars like Rogers, Bacon advanced science and mathematics in the 13th century. In the 14th century, John Wycliffe spoke out against corruptions in the church, inspiring later reforms like Martin Luther King. So the first man was John Wycliffe, who spoke out that the church is corrupt. They're corrupt practices in the church. He spoke against the church, and later it gave words to the another philosopher, German philosopher. His name was Martin Luther King. He nailed 95 things which were wrong in Roman Catholic Church, and he nailed it at the door of Witteman's the church in German. He nailed at the door. Okay, Wittemensburg, and then people would read and they would come and they will learn what's wrong with the church. Literary history, Middle Ages. Religion played a major role in medieval English life and literature. One famous poem from this period, that was Piers Plowman, explored the Christian spiritual themes through a dream version. Another important work, that was the Book of Margaret Came, is an autobiography focused on the author's religious experience. In contrast, the Postons, later written between 1420 and 1500, provide a glimpse into the everyday medieval life. This is the literary history of the time. And then we can see the spread of the idea was helped by the invention of the printing press in the 15th century. We can see that there was the invention of the printing press and they spread ideas, information. So during the Middle Ages, romances, stories about chivalry knights became very popular, especially tales about King Arthur. So because there was no printing press and these ideas spread among the common people. So the Arthurians legends, originally passed down by the Welsh poets, written down in Latins by Geoffrey of Monmouth in 1135. His work inspired French, Germans, and English writers to adopt these stories with a focus on chivalry. One famous Arthurian story, Sir Gawain's and the Green Knights, was written around 1375. Later in the 15th century, Sir Thomas Morley compiled Le Morte, the authors of Middle English versions of the Arthurian's tales. Now, a very important event is also here, the 100 Years' War between France and England. Even this war was not continued for 100 years. There were some breaks also in this 100 years. So John Wycliffe's reforms effort happens during the 100-year war. So his reforms regarding John Wycliffe reforms effort happened during the 100 Years' War. It happened during the 100-year wars. It was a long conflict between England and France that began in 1337 under Edward III. So the war lasted over a century with the breaks in between. During these times, England also faced major internal conflicts, including the deadly Black Death plague. So there was a Black Death also during this 100-year wars, which wiped out a third of the population. 1/3 of the population was wiped out by this Black Death. So the peasants' revolt also occurred during this 100 Years' War, 1381, and the forced removals of the King Richard II in 1399, which put Henry IV on the throne. So these all happened during the 100 Years' War, right? Now, the war had many famous moments such as the Henry V victory at the Agnicourt and the French lifting the siege of the Orleans under John of Arc leadership. Also happened during 100 Years' War. When the war ended in 1453, England had lost nearly all its French territories. In 100 Years' War, the French territory which are owned by the England, they lost, and was on the brink of another conflict, the Wars of the Roses. So there was another war after 1453 at the end of 100-year war. This was called Wars of Roses. This was the war between two families over the power of the throne of England. So this was a battle for the England throne between the two rival families, the House of the York, symbolized by the white rose, and the House of the Lancaster, symbolized by the red rose. The struggle ended in 1485 when Henry Tudor, a Lancastrian, defeated Richard III at the Battle of the Bosworth Field. Henry became King Henry VII, an event that is often seen the end of the Middle Ages in England. So 1485, the end of the Middle Ages, with the defeat of who? Uh, where is that? Richard III, and Henry VII becomes the King of England. Is the end of the Middle Ages. Literary history. The revival of English as a literary language was led by Geoffrey Chaucer, the most important writer of the 14th century Middle English. His greatest work, The Canterbury Tales, is a collection of stories told by a group of pilgrims traveling from London to Canterbury to visit the shrine of Thomas A. Becket, who was like a saint, murdered by Henry II. So these pilgrims come from all parts of the medieval society, including nobles, farmers, clergy, and townspeople. In the famous prologue, Chaucer painted a lively and detailed picture of English life in the late Middle Ages. So this was all about Middle Ages. So I hope you would have enjoyed this lecture because it's in detail. Despite if you have any question regarding in the Middle Ages, please you can leave your comment